ja mul on siin igasugused mõtted, mida võiks teha, vaata pärast direktori valimisi me võiksime nagu Ukuga rääkida, et kõik küsivad, huvi on ka õppejõudude hulgas. Et võiks teha niisuguse nagu sellise väikse paketi, et oleks üks ajaloolane, kultuuriloolane või kirjandusteadlane, üks lingvist, mitte rääkida Ukrainast. Jah, sest kogu aeg küsitakse.
No mul on sama
muidugi
idee.
Materjale on igasugused, kuule, aga siis suhtleme sellel teemal.
No, mingi variant on mikrokraad, aga kes seda tahab?
Ei, aga no vaatame, millest alustada.
Me teeme midagi Akadeemia plussi raamis.
Kas või, aga seda peaks arutama.
Ja.
Peaks olema veel keegi kambas, sest no ma ütlen, mina kõike ei tea.
Mina
nagu seda asja kogu aeg õpin juurde.
No, just. Ja mina üksinda ka mul ei ole initsiatiivi, ma olen lihtsalt laisk.
No mina olen ka laisk, eks ole, aga ma vaatan nagu see, ikkagi see asi huvitab ja vaata, tõlgin ka,
Hallo Johannes.
Ja, wie geht es Ihnen, Johannes?
Hallo, und ich muss mich kurz hier...
Ja,
irgendein Problem.
Ich habe Sie nicht bemerkt. Also, entschuldigen.
Kein Problem.
Also, wir reden und wir haben einfach nicht bemerkt.
Nein, alles gut. Das war sehr interessant für mich. Dann kann ich ein bisschen Estnisch lernen.
Ah, ja. Johannes kann Litauisch.
Wie bitte?
Litauisch.
Ja, genau. Litauisch müsste auch noch kommen, dass Sie sich daran erinnern, ja.
Ja.
Ich gucke gerade, ich poste noch mal die Veranstaltung auf Facebook. Jetzt sind ich habe irgendwie gerade ein Problem mit meinem Zoom. Jetzt geht's. Wir sind nur zu viert.
Tere, Ivo. Ja, nüüd ma näen, mul on niisugune kitsas ekraan, et ma näen peamiselt praegu seda oma presentatsiooni ja
see ongi kõige tähtsam.
Aga Karsten, te jälgite, kui tuleb küsimusi või mingit, mina seda vestlust, seda chati ei loe.
Ei, kindlasti.
Kui ma räägin, ma ei loe, ma ei saa, see katkestab kohe nagu...
Ma võin seda jälle näha, kui sinu sharing on lõppenud. Praegu ma eriti palju ka ei näe.
Aga no sa ütled ise, mis korraldus on.
Ja, me teeme nii, et sa räägid oma jutu ära. Ja siis alustame selle Q&A-ga. Nii. Hi, Xenia.
Ma reklaamisin täna natuke tudengitele, keda ma nägin loengus, aga ikka igal ühel on muidugi tegemist, et igaüks ei saa. Reeli tuleb, oi kui armas. Karsten, ma räägin inglise keeles või mis keeles ma räägin? Slaidid on inglise keeles.
Ja. Minu meelest sa võiksid ka, ma ei tea, vene või
Ukraina keeles ma võin rääkida, palun.
Selleks natuke keerulisem küll.
Aga seal on mõned tekstid, et võidakse neid lugeda siis vähemalt, et ma räägin inglise keeles, aga neid siis saab näha.
Ei, ootame veel 2 minutit. Yeah, good afternoon to everyone. I think we give the people 1, 2 or 3 minutes to join. And then we are going to start with a short introduction of today's presenter, Anna Verschik, before I give the floor to Anna. Okay, welcome again. Good afternoon to everyone who joined us today to our TÜHI Ukraine Talks series. Our speaker today is Professor Anna Verschik from Tallinn University. She is a professor of general linguistics. And I'm going to introduce her to you. I mean, some of you know her already, but some of you maybe they don't. So after graduation from the University of Tartu, Anna studied also at the Oxford Hebrew and Jewish Studies Center and defended her master's degree in multilingualism in Tartu. In 2000, she was awarded a PhD from the University of Tartu for her dissertation on the topic Estonian Yiddish and its contacts with co-territorial languages. She worked at the Institute of Estonian Language and the Estonian Institute of Humanities. Then she joined the Narva College in Narva, an organization from the University of Tartu, where she was the head of the Department of Estonian Language and Literature. Later, she taught also in Helsinki, and in 2002, she joined Tallinn University, where she is teaching from 2006 as professor. Her scholarly interests include topics like Estonian-Russian language contacts, multilingualism on the internet, sociolinguistics in the Baltic countries, contacts of Yiddish in the Baltic area, and the sociolinguistic situation of post-Soviet countries in a comparative perspective. Today, she's introducing us to the language landscape in Ukraine. I think this is a very welcomed addition to our series where we have so far focused on history and politics. So thank you again very much, Anna, for sharing your time with us today. And the floor is yours.
For your kind introduction, Karsten. So I cannot say that I'm a specialist in Ukrainian studies, but somehow I am more and more involved in this topic. So through studying Ukrainian, translating recently Ukrainian poetry into Estonian and various other activities. So I have done some scholarly work on Ukrainian as well. But today's topic is something that, well, is not, let's say, research in a topic in a strict sense. So there is nothing like research question, introduction, analysis, conclusions. So nothing like that. So I hope you forgive me because it's rather impressionistic, but this is what interests me in Ukraine, in a historical perspective, as well as what is going on now. So this soft self-Ukrainization, I have to give some comment to explain why this is like it is. So in Ukrainian, there is a term лагідна українізація, which means like soft, not coerced, so something that is very natural. And this self in brackets is because if I were speaking Estonian, there is a difference. Ukrainiseerimine, it means it is done from outside. And if it is Ukrainiseerumine or Ukrainastumine, it is something that people do to themselves. So this is why I put this in brackets. So this is my plan. We will start with some very basic concepts of social linguistics. We'll discuss what mother tongue is, and then something about language borders. And we discuss the notion of Verschik as well. Many of you might have heard about it, but do not know what it's all about. Then we will discuss the situation of language shift and reversing language shift. This is what is happening now in Ukraine, at least I feel that this is the case. So we'll discuss shift to Ukrainian and some fascinating examples when writers and poets start writing in Ukrainian. So it's something that deserves attention because language for a writer or a poet is not just something marginal. It is their life, it's their profession. So a switch to another language is something quite radical. So what has happened, you probably have a rough idea. What has happened is a Russification of Ukrainians throughout the Russian Empire and also under the Soviet rule. So basically it was promotion of Russian and asymmetrical bilingualism. So I don't have time to go into the history of persecution of Ukrainian here, but it's quite, the material is available, so you can read up if you want. So this is asymmetrical bilingualism. So speakers of other languages had to know Russian, but those who spoke Russian, they did not necessarily know other local languages. So results of such a policy were different in different, you could say, union republics or autonomous republics, but in Ukraine, partly because the languages are closely related, so both are East Slavic languages, and because, well, for this historical symbiosis, the long history of being in one state, at least, yeah, for some part of Ukraine, well, this Russification was quite intensive. But at the same time, there was a joke. I have heard it in different connections, also in Estonia, but read this joke also in some books describing the language situation in Ukraine. So who is a nationalist? A nationalist is a person who speaks at least 2 languages. And who is an internationalist? So an internationalist is a person who speaks only 1 language. So it refers to the Soviet situation, to this situation of asymmetrical bilingualism. So that if you wanted to promote, or at least to, if you wanted some space for another language, for non-Russian language. So of course it depended on the circumstances, but there was a risk that you would be accused in nationalism, as opposed to proletarian internationalism. So well, the tragedy of for Ukrainian, I mean, language and culture. So it was not enough time for the construction of own modernization. So if you, those peoples who had come up with a modern standard language and developed modern culture in this language, they were more safe as far as Russification was concerned. So at first, of course, the Soviet Union started as a state of equal opportunities. It's another story what was behind it, but there was some promotion of local languages, including Ukrainian, as opposed to the Tsarist imperial policies. But then this time was too short, it was cut short. And so the problem was that if you don't have a fully fledged standard language, or it's not enough, now it has not developed all possible registers, and it is cut short, then you have to get any other kind of modernization. So this Soviet Russian, at first Soviet and Russian was not the same thing, but gradually this concept kind of merged. So you had to, to get access to let's say education, serious non-fiction registers, such as scholarly texts, and so on and so on. So you had to know Russian in order to be an educated person. So here, well, if you didn't have this full-fledged standard language like the Baltic republics had, then there was a risk that this local language, in this case Ukrainian, would be presented as something purely ethnographic. So it's rural, it's well, it's nice, but it's not for serious people, it's not for educated people. So stereotype that people in rural area or in the west of Ukraine speak Ukrainian. And what happens in language shift? So it means that some speakers of, let's say, Ukrainian, they internalize this stereotype. They feel that maybe, yeah, in order to have a better future, in order to, to qualify as an educated, sophisticated person, you have to better to switch to Russian. So this is a picture. I regret I don't have the year here, but it was definitely before the Maidan. So I saved this picture in 2014, but I don't remember where from. So it means this slogan is you want bilingualism, learn Ukrainian. So this is what it is about when people say that they want a bilingual state. So what does it mean actually? So mother tongue, I'm going to talk about it a little bit because we deal with this question in censuses. So this a very general idea for non-linguists that people have one mother tongue and it is pretty much the language they acquire as their first language. Of course, many people still have this naive idea that ethnic Ukrainians speak Ukrainian and Estonians speak Estonian. So this is why, well, there was a bit of debate here, because some Estonian, well, educators and politicians, they thought that if there are Ukrainians who speak Russian, then they are Russians, they're ethnic Russians. But believe me, the picture is much more complicated. It's not always so. So ethnicity is historically relevant in Eastern Europe, not in Western Europe, but in the Soviet and post-Soviet world, it is still relevant. So it's not that it is imposed on people, but people describe themselves in this way. So ethnicity, citizenship, and language, well, the first language, the preferred language, are not necessarily the same, coincide of these categories. Of course, You can be an ethnic Ukrainian, a citizen of Ukraine, and speak Ukrainian as your first language. It happens so, but it's not always the case. So there are Russian speakers, and well, let's say language shifters, though, who are gradually shifting to Ukrainian. They do not necessarily identify with ethnic Russians, or so they may say that they're Ukrainian citizens, ethnic Ukrainians, but speakers of Russian whatsoever. So the picture is quite complicated. So a scholarly view, very briefly, is that it is sometimes it's impossible to describe what is one's mother tongue in objective terms. There are three aspects, and they can be at odds with each other. So origin, so something you cannot change. You cannot change the fact that you were born in a certain place and your parents spoke to you in a certain language. Yeah. Then there is competence. Sometimes it's problematic. I won't go into technical details, but it is not always about how good is your speech in the terms of grammar. It may mean many different things. It's not so easy to determine competence. And then affiliation, so how you feel, now where you want to belong, what language is for you the preferred language for various reasons. So a person can have several mother tongues and can associate him or herself with the language acquired later in life, or feel differently in different periods of times. So there is still some discourse, and it is characteristic not only of Ukraine, but for other post-Soviet countries as well, that, well, if you're, let's say, you're ethnically Ukrainian, whoever, but your first language is Russian or any other language, and then you start learning, well, the language of your ethnicity, so to say. And so they say that they are learning their mother tongue, referring to grown-ups. So which means that they refer to this naive idea that language and ethnicity are more less the same thing. So Ukrainians speak Ukrainian, and if a Ukrainian does not yet speak Ukrainian but learns it, that means that this Ukrainian is learning his or her mother tongue. It happens in the Facebook group Переходь на українську. I will discuss it later. This group, it's an interesting group, but sometimes you read this. We're helping Ukrainians, meaning ethnic Ukrainians, to learn their mother tongue. So it may sound strange. Of course, well, some statistics, and I highly recommend your Volodymyr Kulik. He's one of the most prominent sociolinguists, well, sociologists of language in Ukraine. He publishes in English. There's a lot of highly relevant publications. So these figures are from this publication. I'm not going to read the slide. You can get my slides, and if you want, you can consult this article. But you see that there are more, and when in the census, when you provide, or in a survey, when you provide an option for multiple ethnicity or multiple identity or multiple mother tongue, you get a more nuanced picture. So you see that the percentage of those who identify themselves with the Russian language only, it is steadily decreasing, and it's before the present, well, I don't know how to refer, the war started in 2014, but I mean the present phase of the war, should we say. So it was already after the, 2017, of course, the war was going on, but it was before the current phase. Yeah, so you see, even in the so-called Russian-speaking regions like South and East, you see the decrease in identity linked to Russian only. So this is a map. It is not very good. It's not very legible. So it is language situation in some oblast. So oblast is an administrative unit in Ukraine, oblast centers and big cities in Ukraine. And mova якою спілкуються вдома, language spoken at home. And so you see here Ukrainian, mostly Ukrainian, so this yellow and orange, mostly Russian is blue, dvomовні, so bilingual, it is purplish, and then another language, green, another language. So you see in the West, you see another language, it's probably Hungarian, so there are other languages than Ukrainian and Russian, or Surzhyk. So I'm going to talk about Surzhyk. What is Surzhyk? So it's a kind of a map. Well, let us discuss language borders. For a linguist, it is clear that languages are not discrete entities. So sometimes you can say, well, here is Estonian and here is Ukrainian. So there are different languages you wouldn't claim that they are close languages for variety of reasons. But sometimes people they think that language is only the standard language. So what you are supposed to use in writing and in serious genres. But standard languages are just, standard language is just one variety. It's called variety. You can have regional varieties known as dialects, social varieties in some societies, and depending on the situation, depending whom you talk to, and so on. So standard language is only one variety. So here again, you have a problem. Censuses and surveys ask, do you speak language X or a language Y? So what kind of X? It especially refers to so-called world languages or big languages, such as Russian, because you can ask whether Russian is spoken in Ukraine is the same as Russian spoken in Moscow or in Omsk or in Estonia or in Kazakhstan or in Germany, etc., etc. No, of course not. And there are differences. There are subtle differences. So do all speakers of Russian as L1, so first language, it's a standard abbreviation, in Ukraine speak the same kind of Russian? Probably no. So some of them are gravitating toward the standard Russian of Russia, whatever it means, and some speak clearly regionally colored varieties of Russian. So, and when you have context between closely related languages, you get some interesting things. Well, finally, we get to Surzhyk. So the direct meaning is bread from different kinds of grains. So today we would say that mixed grain is something very healthy, but in olden times it was considered something like substandard. So something impure or contaminated. So it's not even one in-between variety between Russian and Ukrainian. It's a cluster of varieties. And so it is being looked down upon both by mainstream Russian speakers. And in Russia, the linguistic culture is very strict. So if you don't speak standard Russian, if in your speech some regional characteristics are present, then it is very bad. So it means that you are not educated or whatever. And especially Ukrainisms in standard Russian of Russia are stigmatized, but not so in Ukraine. And there are also Ukrainian speakers who are still seeing Surzhyk as a threat because they see it as a consequence of Russification. So people who from villages, from rural areas, come to towns and they try, their first language was Ukrainian, so they are trying to learn Russian to speak. They don't learn it in a formal, under formal circumstances with a teacher, instructor, and textbooks. They just get it from the environment. And so this is some kind of in-between variety. It can be different, and so it is associated with uneducated speech, vulgarity, or language shift. So it is called substratum, so the trace of Ukrainian features in Russia. And in the 90s, when it was already possible to speak freely about Soviet language policy and its consequences, there was a genre of literature in Ukraine, anti-Surzhyk. So a lot of books and pamphlets and dictionaries and you name it. So anti-Surzhyk. So this is just one example. If you type, in Ukrainian anti-Surzhyk, and you'll get a lot of pictures. So I picked this picture. So it says how to pronounce, what is the right lexical item. So you have to say tistechko and not pirozhene. So this is a kind of Ukrainianized Russian for cake. And you see here, lyodanik, the stress is here on E, and not ledinets, and so on and so on. So there are many kinds of such examples. So to get rid of Surzhyk in order to speak the right Ukrainian. But there is a more nuanced view, and although it is not a new book, but I highly recommend it, by Lada Bilayuk. So she discussed many aspects of linguistic situation in Ukraine, and also this Surzhyk. And Surzhyk as the first language, or at least as a preferred variety, is spoken by many Ukrainians. So believe me, for example, I had to translate some videos from Ukraine. So some filmmakers went to Bucha after and Irpin after the liberation, and they filmed there, and they talked to the locals and had to translate this in Estonian. And many people spoke Surzhyk. Sometimes this Surzhyk sounded like more towards Russian, or sometimes more towards Ukrainian. It varied. So people speak it as their first language. So, and there are different kinds of Surzhyk. So we can, of course, argue whether these different kinds of Surzhyk, whether they're structurally different or not. It's a matter of debate. It's a highly debated issue. I'm not going to discuss it here. But since 1991, so since the independence, there is another kind of Surzhyk where people whose first language is Russian are trying to speak Ukrainian. So it's not a hallmark of Russification. So it is going into another direction. Since 2014, as far as I can see, Surzhyk has become somewhat more legitimized, because of course there will be people who will say that it is vulgar, it's neither Ukrainian nor Russian, so people who believe in pure languages, but still it is legitimate in the sense that it is juicy, expressive, straightforward, and you can use it in satirical genres. And by the way, when you have competence in several varieties, but you choose Surzhyk, it's not a matter of competence, it's a matter of choice, you see? So when you are able to speak standard Ukrainian, whatever it means, in such a country with a huge dialectal, huge diversity of regional dialects, whatever kind of Ukrainian, and you can speak pretty much standard Russian, and you can speak Surzhyk, so it's a matter of choice. So this is just an example. these people, whoever is behind this Twitter account, Koks, they write this small poems, jocular, satirical poems. So it is fun. You have to know both Ukrainian and Russian in order to appreciate this. So you have here, this is внеблочный, it's Russian внеблочный, so it means neutral, referring to the status of a country who doesn't belong to, well, to any military blocks. So in Ukrainian, it's позаблоковый. So it is Russian, but written in Ukrainian spelling. Status, well, it is ambiguous. Скасувати is Ukrainian. And sometimes you have, проводить, this is Russian, but sometimes again you have in between forms. So it means something like to abolish the neutral status and to conduct the anti-terrorist operation with NATO. This is basically what NATO is about. So what it is about. So it's внеблочний статус скасувати із НАТО проводить АТО. НАТО воно вообще-то НАТО. And here you have this this disclaimer by the authors that the orthography, so spelling and punctuation is like this, and they use obscene lexicon and Russianisms, Polonisms, Surjik and everything else. So there is another interesting phenomena. I heard this Russian with a Russian accent. What does it mean? So Russian with a Russian accent, I first heard about it in 2014. So see, in Ukrainian, the word российский, it refers to Russian, like Russian language, and also to culture, so to everything that has to do with Russia. So российская мова с российским акцентом, this is something like Russian with the Russian accent. This is funny. But again, you have here, well, in 2014, these little green men and, well, all kind of people from Russia coming with weapons and pretending to be locals. So how they were uncovered, because exactly they spoke Russian with a Russian accent. It means they spoke Russian of Russia. So I will not go into details. So now how the other terms are being coined in order to distinguish between what has to do with the Russian language as such and Russia as the state. But the notorious case was this of porебрик. So it's edge of payment. It's not just a Russian word. It is a specific Petersburg word. So when these soldiers came into, I believe it was Kramatorsk in 2014, and one of these soldiers started shooting, and he shouted to his to his comrades who were fighting on his side. So uйди за поребрик, so kind of get away over this edge of the pavement, so don't be in the middle. And this word поребрик was immediately identified as foreign, a foreign meaning Russian of Russia, and it became a meme. So now if you say Zaporебрик, and it is written in Russian, but written in Ukrainian spelling, so it's funny. It means in Russia or to Russia. So Zaporебриком, it means in Russia. So this is an informal way to refer to it. So there are this, I think this discussion is dated now, but there was some discussion in Ukrainian media. So this title, не віддамо нашу російську мову росіянам. So we shall not give our Russian language to, well, росіянам, to the, Oh my God! In English, you have this problem, yeah, because again, Russians refers to many things. So Russians in Russia, so meaning that Russian language does not belong to Russia. So meaning that we can create our local standards. So like you have US English and British English and Singapore English. So you can have, let's say, Russia's Russian and Ukraine's Russian. But now this discussion is, well, I think this discussion has no future currently. So reversing language shift. Language shift is, well, it has nothing to do with the purely linguistic technical aspects like borrowing. No, language shift has to do with identity and well, with social psychological reasons, so how people view themselves, what they think is important. And so this language shift is basically a situation where when the speakers do not transmit their language to the next generation for a variety of reasons, and then you have reversing language shift. So it means it's a kind of the next, or even more than the next after next generation, corrects the mistakes of the ancestors and tries to go back. And so to acquire, to relearn this language. So there are some studies, not about Ukraine, but well, for example, about Basque speakers in Spain, etc. So such speakers are labeled as new speakers, meaning that they are now joining the speech community. And in these studies, yeah, these are mostly highly educated urban dwellers, middle class, but in Ukraine, as far as I can understand, it's not only urban and not only middle class, so something is going on everywhere. So it is something like undoing the efforts of the generation who wanted the children to speak Russian because then they have a better future. So there are things when we are talking about languages, there's of course prestige, we mentioned it, but it's also prestige is linked to, well, at least two notions. One is historicity. It means the language has a long tradition and it's better if there are some important texts, cultural, religious, in this language. And autonomy, meaning is nobody argues that, let's say, it is not a language but a dialect of some other language. So of course such things as well, autonomy, it's a kind of non-notion. It is well, there are no like linguistic criteria to distinguish between a language or a dialect. It's about status and tradition. So there is a quotation ascribed to Max Weinreich. A language is a dialect with an army and a navy. Many linguists know it, but I found something less well known. This quotation belongs to Vladimir or Zeev Jabotinsky, who lived for a long, well, he was born in Ukraine, at least for a long time. He lived in Ukraine, and he, well, he knew Ukrainian, he was Jewish, he knew Hebrew and Yiddish and Russian and many other languages, and he understood very well well, the situation of Ukrainian back then, and they say not philologies determine a language, but people's self-consciousness. So people believe that this is a separate language. So who are we to tell them it is not? So, so we have these more and more people who say that they are Ukrainian in civic terms now, meaning citizenship and, you know, residence in Ukraine. So I just yesterday, I heard a very interesting paper again by Volodymyr Kulik, and he says that even Russian ethnic identity is gradually disappearing. So for some ethnic Russians, being Russian speakers is important, but it's disappearing. It's interesting. So here is a nice slide. I have shown it in my lectures. This refers to the leader of the neighboring state who claimed that Ukraine is a fake state, it's a non-state, and it was invented by Lenin. Well, before that, we heard that Ukraine was invented in Austrian headquarters, and now we heard that it was invented by Lenin. And the Ukrainians, they responded with this funny meme. So you see this lady here, it is Olga or Olha in Ukrainian. So the Duchess says, guys, write a letter to Lenin so that he would create Ukraine. And here you have this very well-known picture by Ilya Repin. Zaporizhia Cossacks are writing a letter to the Turkish Sultan. So this means that they wrote it with humor and using coarse language and making fun of this Turkish ruler. And they say, готово, пане, передайте Леніну, будь ласка, йому тут лист написали. So it is finished. Please give it, hand it over to Lenin. So he has a letter, so he has mail. And this gentleman is Hrushevsky, a renowned Ukrainian historian, one of the most important historians in, well, the late 19th, early 20th century. And again, we see our favorite device, Russian in Ukrainian spelling, Tavarish, вам тут письмо. So, come comrade, you have a letter here. And here is Lenin who says, well, here in Ukrainian, to hell with them, who is this Olga and why do I have to invent Ukrainians? So this is a very recent meme. Now let us talk about this group. It was created in 2015 and I am following this group. It's very interesting. So it means shift to Ukrainian. And why are these people crossing the street? Now, if you know Russian and Ukrainian, you see переходить or переходити. That means to cross, among other things, it's like to cross over. So this is why you have this imagery. It can be to shift, to transfer, and many other things. But here it is visualized like crossing the street. So you're crossing the street, you're crossing over and getting to, to Ukrainian. So shift to Ukrainian among writers and poets. Karsten, can I talk a little bit more? Or can I have some examples?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is not entirely new. Sometimes, let's say, shift among writers and poets, shift to Ukrainian. Sometimes it appears something against common sense or something irrational. So why on earth are you doing it? Well, you are narrowing your chances to be published and read, because the more people read Russian or English or any other world language than Ukrainian. This is this wonderful book by Johannan Petrovsky Stern, the anti-imperial choice. I keep recommending it. He describes several cases where when it starts from the late 19th century and goes to, well, into the modern times, the contemporary era. So where poets and writers of Jewish origin, so they are not Russians, not Ukrainians ethnically, and they have plenty of other choices, and yet how they chose Ukrainian. One example, it's an early example. So you see Leonid Kiselyov, who died early from the disease. And he wrote in Russian, but then he shifted to Ukrainian. And this is a programmatic poem written in 1963. I have a rough translation into English. I cannot dedicate much attention to it, but you see, it's something is going on here. So I will forget all offenses. So what offenses? So maybe something in the childhood, maybe, we don't know. Yeah. So everything is fine. So I have forgotten everything, but now I'm suddenly reminded of a song in a lovely and half-forgotten Ukrainian language. So something that probably belongs to the childhood, and it's half-forgotten, but it was here. And you see, and so in the room, so suddenly, the word suddenly, so it happens suddenly, and suddenly you see that people in the room, they are strangers. You don't feel affiliated to them anymore. And then the last stanza, I will stay a bit on the edge of abyss and suddenly realize, broken down in sorrow, that everything in the world is only a song in the Ukrainian language. So I'm reading this translation. Yeah. So you see, it happened earlier. It's not only a new phenomenon. So let's look at this self-Ukrainization. So Boris Khersonsky is a poet, a translator. So he, until 2014 or 15, he wrote poetry in Russian. He translated. He is proficient in Ukrainian. He translated a lot of Ukrainian poetry into Russian. But he says something like this. So Ukrainian is in bold here. So today is the day of mother tongue. So he says in Russian, then he repeats it in Ukrainian. Сьогодні день рідної мови. So I had one mother tongue, meaning Russian. Now I have two, meaning Russian and Ukrainian. Earlier I had two homelands. Now, meaning, although he was born in Ukraine, but still, you know, Russia, where he got published a lot, and so on and so on. So Russia, he felt some affiliation. So two motherlands. Yeah. Now I have only one left. It means so only Ukraine. So it is his Facebook entry. Yeah. So now he has two mother tongues, Ukrainian and Russian, and one homeland, one motherland, or fatherland. I don't know how to translate it, but Batkivshchina is fatherland if you translate word like directly, literally. So, well, this is a long quotation. I can read it to you. It is Alex Averbuch, also known as Alexander Averbuch, who started writing poems in Ukrainian. So after the collection of my poems had appeared in December 2021, an 8-year-long era came to an end. My private era of a complete and irreversible transition from the Russian literature to the Ukrainian literature. 8 years of war, 8 years of my war, struggle, self-destruction, and self-recreation. This was a conscious decision. I decided that this is how it should be and continued working. And those who read, or God forbid, heard my first poems in Ukrainian can confirm that I had and still have a lot to work on. This period has come to an end. My internal biography has been cut anew with bare cold scissors. It is painful because for a person from the east of Ukraine, it is a step where it is not always possible to maintain balance. Sometimes people are being pulled to different directions. I don't know whether I made it completely because I experienced this pulling too. but for me, quite a religious person. The significance of what happened is rooted not only in the external events, but also in the text, in their gradualness and sequences. So it is from Alexander Averbuch's Facebook. And then one picture here. Johann Petrovsky Stern, whom I mentioned, he is a prolific literary scholar, and he's historian, but he is also an artist, a painter. And so he has this picture from 2018. You see, my Russian-speaking parents features as Lot and his wife. Figure out yourself. Now, what is featured as Sodom after Bucha and Irpen? No words remained. So his father was Miron Petrovsky, a renowned scholar of Russian literature. His father passed away this year. So, of course, his father and mother they are fluent in Ukrainian, but their first language is Russian. So you know this biblical story, Lot and his wife. So this city that is burning here is Moscow. This is Moscow. And the righteous ones, so Lot and his wife and his family, were saved. They were allowed to get away from this burning city. But the wife looked back. They were told, don't look back, but she looked back. So it's a picture that, well, has a lot of meaning, and says it is his explanation, my Russian-speaking parents. So this is something, this world is no more, there will no return. And now this is a very new poster. Говори українською, бо ворог не може. So speak Ukrainian because the enemy cannot. So Ukrainian is something that is a weapon. Our enemy cannot speak Ukrainian. Well, whatever you speak, you can also speak Ukrainian. So this is what the enemy cannot. So this is something instead of conclusion. I don't, as I mentioned, I don't have this very strictly outlined research, so it's rather impressionistic. So I think that Ukrainian has made it. So I think under such circumstances, modernization completed. So decolonization, well, it has to happen yet, but it has started. So of course not without the help of the war, but still. And I think that it's extremely relevant that shift to Ukrainian, or at least choice to write sometimes in Ukrainian, occurs. It's an option, a real option for poets and writers. And I don't know, as a scholar, I'm not sure how to analyze these explanations. So we've seen a couple of explanations of how these people describe their choice of Ukrainians, how to analyze it in scholarly terms, how to study it, I don't know. Then there is another thing that has to be mentioned. So some Estonians, and not only Estonians, who know at least some Russian, are now trying to read Ukrainian or to listen to Ukrainian news. So it's a new research topic. And I think it has also practical implications. So we can, maybe we in the university can do something for this. And then thank you, Дякую за увагу. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna. And in the final passages of your presentation, I got caught by the idea that all the things that you have told us may perfectly be used by Putin as a reason to attack, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
the country is basically shifting out of this Ruski Mir, this Russian world that he is proposing.
Yes, we are to blame because we exist.
Exactly.
That's it.
Yeah, I'll open the floor for questions. And yeah, Johannes, okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for this amazing talk. Very, very interesting and enlightening. And yeah, it's really a great overview of this this linguistic landscape also in Ukraine. I mean, in Germany, there's a lot of myths about this. So there's like a Western Ukrainian West, like Ukrainian West, oriented towards the EU, and there's an Eastern, like a Russian-speaking East, oriented to Russia and stuff like this. So this is what the German public is full of, and we desperately need this kind of differentiation. So this is very great. I have actually one question and one comment. Like my question would be, you said that at some point there was a discussion whether we should standardize the Russian spoken in Ukraine. And then you said, well, at this point, it's actually pointless. I mean, it's obvious at some point now that it's pointless because of the war, but would you say that this is a perspective for the future, actually? Because, I mean, like the people from Ukraine, my friends that I know, they do have this, this specific Russian. Also, if you listen to this Russian from Odessa, for example, it's very specific. All this that they have the H instead of the G and stuff like this. So this is very interesting, right?
Yeah.
So that would be my first question, and the second is rather like a comment. Is you obviously don't not mention it just because there wasn't enough time. I just wanted to highlight that it's very interesting that in the 20s there was this policy of Korenizacja, right?
Yeah, indigenization, yes.
Right, right. So that you would have local elites, you would enroot the local elites in Ukrainian so that they wouldn't be like foreign people sent from Moscow or whatever. And that it was very fashionable at this time in the 20s to speak Ukrainian. If you wanted to climb the social and political ladder, you had to learn Ukrainian, stuff like this. And it's just like fascinating. Well, it's a tragic story because, as you said, it was not enough time to truly enroot it then at this period, right? So just to comment at this, yeah, thank you very much for your talk.
Well, as for creation of, well, the local standard of Russian, so I am not Ukrainian, I cannot say do this or do that. But it's not my, well, I should have framed it in a better way. So it's not that I say that it is pointless now. Many people say, many people in Ukraine say this, well, at least some scholars say so. Well, the idea is that, well, you see, in a sense, the Soviet Union and its mental and legal continuation, the Russian Federation, is kind of owns, it says that it doesn't say, but it implies that it owns the Russian language. And so, no, I don't know of any other empire, well, whatever the atrocities of colonialism were, but, you know, owning a language. Imagine British Empire says that everybody who speaks English, you know, belong to us in some mental and spiritual way. And yeah, you cannot imagine this. So this is a way to dissociate, to say, come on, many people who speak Russian, they are not ethnic Russians, they don't think about themselves in such terms, they just speak Russian in their religion. But now it is problematic. I don't say that this is a bad idea now. And so the point about indigenization, well, the roots were, well, why the reason was, of course, there were people who were really sincere. They want to compensate for the injustice under the Russian Empire. So all people are equal and they can speak their languages and promotion of the languages, but there also this very pragmatic reason that you cannot win over these people because there is, so say, Ukrainian idea that is very attractive. So if you don't take it over and say, well, we give you the right ideology plus Ukrainian culture and language. And so it's it's a very cynical way to, to win people over. But it was taken seriously, but by some, Ukrainian, there was socialists and communists who thought that this is now really, this is a real thing. And I think it was Mykola Khmelyovy, so one of the most renowned poets and man of letters in the 20s. He proposed the slogan "Away from Moscow, Геть від Москви." So meaning that not in a political sense, but in a cultural sense. But then it was too much. So this Ukrainization was, as well as other indigenization policies, were interrupted. And while there is another story what it meant for the Ukrainian language. It's a topic for a separate lecture. But yes, you are right.
Yeah, thank you. You can either raise your hand and if you have a question, or you can type your question into the chat. These are the options. Ksenia.
Thank you for your lecture. It was very interesting, especially all these contacts and relationship between two languages. I have, I think, quite a small question, but I got curious when you said that the word Rosyanie is relatively new in Ukrainian, like
Rosyanie, yes.
Rosyanie, yeah.
Yeah, well, because you see, well, of course, in Russia, this word Rosyanie, it is relevant because you have to somehow to distinguish between, well, say, ethnic Russians or speakers of Russians and the citizens, the residents of the Russian Federation. So in Russia, it is quite unnatural that you have this distinction. But in Ukraine, people, they don't speak about why. It's a foreign country. Like in Estonian, you can say venelased ja venemaalased if you want. So if you write Vene in Estonian with a small letter, it means Russian ethnically or linguistically. But if you write Vene with a capital letter, it refers to the country. So you need to do this to make these differences. So there was, yes, this Rossiyski. This referred, there was no distinction, and now the need to distinguish appeared in, I think it appeared in 2014. So they had this word Rosyany, meaning like Rosyania, and adjectives like Rossiyansky. Well, it's not standard Ukrainian, but it's what I've heard. So something that had to do with the citizens of Russia, inhabitants of Russia, but not our local Russians, or not Ukraine. And now I hear they increasingly using Moscovite, so which is Muscovite. And well, there are even some politicians who, well, when they talk, well, not mainstream, well, I don't know, mainstream or not, but I know at least of one politician who refers to the Russian Federation as Moskovska Federacja. In order to be clear. Yeah, well, whether this is right or wrong, it's another question, but I've seen this Moskovitska mova.
But what word did you use before this? Did you use Ruski simply?
Rossiyska mova, Rossiyska. In Ukraine, it's Rossiyska mova.
Yeah, but the person?
I don't know. Ruski, but you see, Ruski means something else. Yeah, because all this confusion with the term Rus. Yes, it's not the same. Yeah, so Ruski is not Ruski. It's not this. And I'm afraid, well, we have to to have another lecture on this. Yeah, but this is interesting because I had this because I noticed it in increasingly, so using something else to distinguish well, what is going on in Russia and in Ukraine, even if it happens in the Russian language. Yeah.
Thank you. I had to realize, of course, that I do not know too much about the development of Ukrainian as a language, right? And I was thinking about the differences in state formation in the territory of Ukraine for centuries. You know, Russian Empire, Habsburg Empire. How did this affect the language? Is
Well,
there a strong dialect in the West?
Again, we need another lecture. There is literature, but of course there is literature about it, and of course, well, so see, basically, it's very basic. So Austrian Empire and later all the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they did not persecute Ukrainian. It's not to say that it was a nice empire, but in the terms of in these terms, it was more benign. So to the development of standard Ukrainian, and well, their main concern in the region were Poles and the Polish language, but not Ukrainian. And there were different types of, say, Ukrainian identity, let's say, well, in the middle of the 19th century in the West. But in the East, meaning the territories that belonged to the Russian Empire, they were increased. There, the situation got increasingly worse for Ukrainian. And at some point, Ukrainian was completely banned. So not only printing in Ukrainian, so the infamous the EMS decree, it meant that you cannot use Ukrainian in public speech and so on and so on. So, and they were concerned that books from the West, meaning the Ukrainian under the Austrian power, these books can be smuggled and so on and so on. So yes, but they couldn't do anything to it. And of course, if you are talking about identity, well, of course, imagine, well, this Western part that had never ever belonged to the Russian Empire, when it was incorporated into the Soviet Union, to some extent the situation could be compared to the incorporation of the Baltic states. I mean, yeah. But you know, it's interesting that the differences now, the differences in well, ethno-linguistic identity and usage of Ukrainian, these differences are decreasing. So.
Thank you. Anyone else? I mean, the general question that I had to struggle with when I was listening to your talk is, I mean, in a way, we can speak about a kind of marginalization of Russian language in Ukrainian nowadays, right? So, what is the future of Russian language in Ukraine?
Well, I don't know, because, well, I think that this own standard of Russian, it's unlikely under the circumstances, but who knows? Well, I think that as a home language or as a minority language, well, it will survive. So nobody restricts, I mean, nobody restricts the usage of Russian. It is still, to some extent, it was still asymmetrical. So that if you speak Russian, you can, you know, if you speak Ukrainian, then there is a risk still, there was a risk still that let's say the salesperson would ask you to switch to Russian, although everybody understands. But you see, for some people, it's a symbolic thing. It's not a practical thing. So there's still some residual belief in the superiority of Russia and in this unrefined rural status of Ukrainian. It can be marginally still there. But of course, there are ethnic Russians in Ukraine. Yes, and they speak Russian, and I think they will be speaking it. But you see, the wish to associate with the language. Yeah, it's a question who owns the language. We say that the Russian state doesn't own the language, true, but it's not that the state owns the language, but people would like to dissociate maybe in any way. So there will be, I think, some gradual shift towards Ukrainian in the younger generations, and maybe, well, these intermediate varieties, they will not disappear. No matter how language planners, teachers would say, no, it's not good, because, well, this is the reality. So the Suuržik and the likes. Yes, but still, you see this decolonization process. We hear in Estonia, it's maybe difficult to imagine this. What the degree of Russification, also of the public space was. So all these debates about monuments, and not talking only about the Soviet monuments, some military men or so. So now this discussion started in earlier, and it is going on and going on. And so the legitimacy. So it's not that, let's say, Tolstoy was not a good writer, but he has nothing to do with Ukraine. So why should we have not one street or square or metro station named after Tolstoy, but many, and discussion like this? So I don't know. I cannot answer your question more precisely.
Of course, it's just speculation. I understand that. Johannes.
Yeah, one more question that came to my mind. Could you tell us anything about the language policy, so the official language policy of the Ukrainian state, especially after 2014? And the second question that came to my mind, if I'm not mistaken, I think in spite of the Holocaust and all the horrible things, there was still a considerable Jewish minority in Ukraine, especially until the end of communism. I think it was like close to 500,000 or something, and then many people moved away. Do you know anything about or is there such a thing as a linguistic preference to Ukrainian or Russian?
You mean among Jews?
Yes.
So, well, the official language policy, well, it was, again, it was a pretext for the neighboring state to interfere because, well, the official language is Ukrainian. But, well, there are, when there is one official language, it doesn't mean that other languages are banned. Yes, and the reality was, you saw this poster, you want bilingualism, learn Ukrainian. So this was the situation. Now those who speak Ukrainian, they sure are able to speak Russian, but not always the other way around. So this was the situation. And it was for symbolic reasons. You have one state language for symbolic reasons. Yeah, so, but internally, well, of course, there were people who were afraid of Ukrainization, but now internally this is becoming less and less problematic, because the majority of Ukrainian citizens accepts, I think, well, yesterday this Volodymyr Kulik I think he was asked precisely the same question. So according to surveys, about 80% or more of Ukrainians say, well, this is fine. We should have one state language. You don't have to have two. And there are, by the way, we are talking as if there are only two languages, but there is Hungarian. And well, it is not always very straightforward because Hungarians are an indigenous minority. And there is some Bulgarian and Romanian and Crimean Tatar as well. Although Crimea is occupied, but well, Crimean Tatar is one of the languages, and so others. As for the Jewish community, well, of course, well, if we are talking about well, earlier times, of course, so some, of course, language shift from Yiddish, it is clear. I don't have to go into the details, but well, shift to Russian because, well, because the home language, well, because of these obvious reasons, you know, urban professions, you know, this image of you know, Russian being the language of the cities, but not always, not necessarily. Also, but still, well, as they are still able to speak Ukrainian. Now it is more diverse, and there is, well, should I say, there is something that can be called Ukrainian Jewish studies. Also, there are people of various origins, not necessarily of Jewish origins, who are attracted to this field, and they learn Yiddish or Hebrew or both, and they study this history. And well, and there is, let's say, translation going on. I mean, translation of poetry and fiction. Now, I know, for example, in Lviv, the Catholic University, which is a very fine university, the teacher of Yiddish, she's not Jewish, she's Ukrainian, she speaks very nice Yiddish, and the teacher of Hebrew. So they learned these languages, and so this is available. And so there are many activities that go on, well, Jewish, I mean, concerning Jewish culture, they go on in both languages, well, Russian and Ukrainian. So I think this is not a problem. So this is as far as I know.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is there anything else that you want to ask? You have the opportunity to ask Anna right now.
Well, you can ask later in the university if you, when you see me, if you come up with something.
Exactly. Grisha, yeah.
Good evening. I just wish to thank Anna for a very inspiring talk. I've been outside listening about these Ukrainian issues, and it's been inspiring for me. And I'm especially glad that you mentioned two wonderful poets, Alex Severbuch and Boris Khersonsky. I like them both. And just a brief note to just a very brief contribution from my part. If my memory doesn't fail me, according to one statistician, one guy who really studies linguistically poetic text, Alex Severbuch was second by his diversity of the language, the diversity of lexes that he uses in his poetry, because his poetry prior to 2021 was partially written in Russian, partially in Ukrainian, and partially in Sutric. So basically, he's a trilingual poet, and thanks to that, his vocabulary is huge. It's expansive. It's larger than those of, so to say, those poets who write in Russian language only. But I can't remember who was on the top of that list. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you are quite right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. There So we can close this lecture for today. Thank you, Anna, again for joining us and for sharing your knowledge with us. Next week, we are going to have a presentation by Margaret Comer about memory issues in the Ukraine, and I would be very happy if you would join us again. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.